Welcome back to World News Daily, bringing you the latest news from around the world. In a historic decision, the Supreme Court struck down the sweeping tariffs imposed by the Trump administration in 2025, fundamentally reshaping American trade policy. This landmark ruling has sent ripples through the global trade community, signaling a significant shift in how the United States will engage with its trading partners. The justices ruled that the president had overstepped by using emergency powers to impose what amounted to a nationwide tax, authority that belongs to Congress alone. This decision underscores the importance of checks and balances in the U.S. government. This ruling is more than a legal technicality. It's a reset of the balance of power, ensuring that major economic decisions must go through the democratic process. Lawmakers from both parties have praised the decision, seeing it as a return to constitutional norms. For American families and businesses, this means relief from rising prices and uncertainty. The tariffs had led to increased costs for everyday goods, affecting the average consumer and small businesses alike. The court's decision restores predictability to the marketplace and reaffirms the Constitution's separation of powers. Investors and business leaders are now more confident in the stability of U.S. trade policy. No longer can a single leader unilaterally rewrite the nation's economic laws. This decision marks a significant check on executive power, ensuring that future trade policies will require broader consensus. Instead, trade policy will be shaped by public debate and legislative negotiation. This opens the door for more transparent and inclusive policymaking, reflecting the diverse interests of the American people. This precedent draws a clear line for future presidents. Emergency powers cannot be used to bypass Congress on major economic issues. It sets a standard for how executive authority should be exercised in the realm of trade. The Supreme Court has not just interpreted a law, it has rebalanced the nation's economic governance for years to come. This decision will likely influence how future administrations approach trade and economic policy, ensuring a more democratic process. The Supreme Court's decision marked a pivotal moment, closing the door on the president's unilateral use of emergency powers to enact sweeping trade policy. This ruling not only sets a new legal precedent, but also redefines the boundaries of executive authority in matters that affect the entire nation's economy. Laws like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act were originally designed to address specific, urgent threats, not to overhaul the entire U.S. trade system or bypass the legislative process. Over time, however, the scope of these laws had expanded, raising concerns about checks and balances. By returning this critical authority to Congress, the court ensures that future tariffs and trade agreements must be openly debated, scrutinized, and voted on by lawmakers who represent the people. This shift restores the constitutional balance between the branches of government. Although this process may be slower and more complex, it allows for meaningful public input and careful consideration of the diverse impacts that trade decisions have on communities across the country. Citizens, advocacy groups, and industry leaders all have a chance to weigh in. For businesses and international partners, this means a more stable, predictable, and transparent approach to trade. Instead of sudden policy shifts, stakeholders can anticipate changes and plan accordingly, fostering stronger global relationships. The ruling also restores democratic accountability. Every representative and senator is answerable to their voters for the trade policies they support or oppose. This transparency strengthens trust in the legislative process. Now, citizens can engage directly with their lawmakers, making their voices heard throughout the legislative process. Whether through public forums, letters, or calls, the public has a renewed opportunity to shape national policy. The power to tax and regulate commerce, core functions of government, is now firmly back in the hands of the people's branch, as intended by the Constitution. Major national decisions will once again be made in the open, through the essential process of democracy, ensuring that the voices of the American people are at the heart of every debate and decision. The use of emergency powers for broad tariffs was the result of decades of expanding executive authority. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, passed in 1977, was intended for targeted actions against foreign threats, not for setting national economic policy. Over time, presidents stretched its language to cover broader goals, culminating in the 2025 tariffs. This unprecedented move triggered a constitutional crisis. As critics argued, the president was usurping Congress's explicit power over taxation and commerce. The conflict set the stage for a decisive judicial intervention. The 2025 tariffs hit American families hard, driving up the cost of living as import taxes were passed down to consumers. Suddenly the price of everyday necessities, things like food, clothing, and household goods, began to climb. For many, the weekly grocery bill became a source of anxiety, as families found themselves paying more for less. Even simple pleasures like a family night out or a new pair of shoes for the kids became harder to afford. Everyday items from clothing to groceries became more expensive, forcing tough choices for those on tight budgets. Parents had to weigh which essentials to buy and which to put back on the shelf. Some families cut back on fresh produce or delayed replacing worn-out clothes, while others dipped into savings just to make ends meet. Small businesses reliant on imported materials saw production costs soar and faced painful decisions about pricing, hiring, and survival. Owners struggled to keep shelves stocked and customers satisfied, all while trying to avoid raising prices too much. Many worried about losing loyal customers or being forced to cut staff hours. Many were forced to lay off staff or close entirely. The ripple effect spread through communities as job losses meant less money circulating in local economies and more families facing financial hardship. Farmers suffered as foreign markets retaliated, slashing demand for U.S. crops and plunging rural communities into crisis. With fewer buyers for their harvests, many farmers faced mounting debts and uncertainty about the future of their land. The promised manufacturing boom never materialized. Instead, supply chains were disrupted and economic uncertainty grew. Factories sat idle, shipments were delayed, and investors grew wary as the economy faltered. The billions collected in tariffs came not from foreign countries, but from American pockets, acting as a drag on the entire economy. Every extra dollar spent on tariffs was a dollar not spent on local businesses, savings, or investments in the future. The policy hurt those it was meant to help, exposing the real cost of protectionism. In the end, it was ordinary Americans, workers, families, and small business owners who bore the brunt of the fallout, learning firsthand how global policies can shape daily life. Legal challenges to the 2025 tariffs began immediately, with business owners and industry groups arguing the president had exceeded constitutional authority. Lower courts consistently sided with the challengers, finding that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not grant the president the power to impose sweeping tariffs. The Major Questions Doctrine played a key role. Only Congress can authorize decisions of vast economic significance. The administration's appeals failed, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, recognizing its constitutional importance. Before the justices, the debate centered on presidential power versus Congress's explicit authority over commerce and taxation. The court ultimately sided with the challengers, affirming the lower courts and delivering a landmark ruling that reasserts the separation of powers. The tariffs triggered a spike in inflation, raising prices for both imported goods and American-made products. Supply chains, built over decades, were thrown into chaos as companies scrambled to adapt, leading to delays and higher costs. The promised manufacturing revival never arrived. Instead, industries faced layoffs and lost export markets. Businesses hesitated to invest, stalling economic growth. The idea that foreign countries would pay the tariffs proved false. American companies and consumers bore the cost. Tariff revenue was simply a transfer from families and businesses to the government, at the expense of economic stability. The 2025 tariffs shocked America's allies, undermining decades of trust in the global trading system. Countries like Canada and the EU saw the move as economic aggression and responded with retaliatory tariffs, escalating trade tensions. Iconic American exports faced new barriers abroad, hurting farmers and manufacturers. The Supreme Court's decision to nullify the tariffs was welcomed worldwide as a return to the rule of law and a sign that U.S. democracy could correct itself. Allies hoped for renewed collaboration and stability. The ruling reassured the world that America remains governed by laws and institutions, not the whims of a single leader. The Supreme Court's ruling is a powerful affirmation of the separation of powers. For years, executive authority had expanded as presidents used emergency declarations to bypass Congress. The court's decision halts this trend, restoring Congress's role as the primary lawmaking body. Lawmakers must now engage in the hard work of legislating on trade, ensuring policies reflect the nation's diverse interests. The ruling is a victory for the rule of law, making clear that no one, not even the president, is above the Constitution. In a divided era, this decision strengthens the foundations of American democracy. With the Supreme Court's decision, the U.S. enters a new era of trade policy and governance. As tariffs unwind, families and businesses will see relief from rising prices. Trade policy will now be shaped through public debate and legislative accountability, not unilateral action. The ruling reinforces checks and balances, making it harder for future presidents to bypass Congress. It's a reaffirmation that America is a nation of laws, not men. The lessons of this period will guide a more thoughtful, democratic approach to economic policy, strengthening both the economy and the republic.